Hello, this is Ruth Guthrie, and we're going to talk today about web accessibility. Before we begin, I'd like you to watch this video on how blind people use Instagram. And if you're an Instagram user, you know it's all about pictures, and you're probably like, what? Well, how does that work? I don't get it. But this guy has a great YouTube site where he talks about how blind people use lots of different technological devices, and this one's on Instagram.
So today I'm going to show you how Instagram works. You may be saying, a blind guy using Instagram? Watch. The interesting thing about doing Instagram for me is that I get to take pictures of the world as it sort of goes by, or places that I go, you know, little pictures of work or whatever, and it's a sort of fun for me. I've never had a camera before. And yes, just like the iPhone, Instagram is accessible too.
Instagram.
So what that means is that the iPhone will talk to me as I move my finger around the screen and tell me where I am.
Tab bar home. Tab bar popular. Tab bar camera.
So let's just get the camera up.
Tab bar camera. Button.
And look, now on the bottom,
Take photo. Button.
that's what it will do. So we'll just take a picture of the crew. Why am I holding the phone up to my face like I can look through the fingers beyond it? But here we go. And there's our picture. So I can just run my finger across the bottom of the phone and it'll tell me what filters I have to choose from.
Apply filter Amaro. Button. Apply filter rise. Button.
So we'll select Filters Pro 2.
Apply filters Pro 2.
Let's accept our picture.
Accept photo. Button.
And now we have to put a caption on it.
Caption.
So now we'll just tell Siri what to write.
Dictate.
Here's a picture of the crew, comma, as we shoot the Instagram video, period. Now we have to choose all the different sharing options.
Toggle Twitter sharing. Toggle Facebook sharing. Toggle Flickr sharing. Toggle Tumblr sharing. Switch button. Off. On. Done.
And here's our Instagram. Look.
Here's a picture of the crew as we shoot the Instagram video. Byland Film Critic. Image.
I've been getting some interesting comments about these too. You know, somebody told me that one was just an orange smudge. So I took a nature shot one time and somebody said I couldn't screw up nature. I took one of myself and it was a shot up my left nostril, so it was great. Someone asked me one time if I check these pictures out with anybody. The answer is no. They're much more fun this way. I don't think I'd ever take pictures if I asked anybody what they look like. You know, if they were any good or not.
So that's kind of neat, and you get to see how the iPhone works with accessible voiceover on the screen too. It's really tough too if you turn accessibility features on your iPhone to try to operate that way, but I think if you tried it for about an hour, you'd probably get pretty good at it. Let's talk about the similarities between building and computer accessibility. It used to be when buildings, none of them were accessible, and if you were in a wheelchair, it was very difficult to get into a building where you had a cane or a walker. And then eventually it became the law that buildings had to be accessible to all people. And lots of people complained, oh, it's going to ruin the aesthetics of the building. It's a historic building. How can we build a ramp? And it'll cost too much money. And there were a lot of excuses as to why we couldn't make buildings accessible. But look, it's 2016 and we did make them accessible. So the complaints were cost, aesthetic appeal, and then other people said there's so few disabled people, why do we have to do it for so few people? And with computers, when they started saying computer websites had to be accessible or software had to be accessible, it was the same things. It'll cost too much money to design something to be accessible, it will aesthetically look horrible, and then the population is too small to justify a change. The National Federation for the Blind started suing companies for inaccessible web design, and one of the famous cases is that they sued Target Corporation. Covered nicely in this Wikipedia article, but I'll give you the highlights. They sued on behalf of different people for accessibility of the Target website because there were no alternative text tags and things that you would see as common knowledge for how you design a web page today. But back then, they didn't, so they were sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act and eventually won $3.7 million in attorney fees, and Target had to fix their website to comply. And it went back and forth for quite a while, but the story has a happy ending because if you read the last part of it, National Federation for the Blind, a national organization which advocates for the accessibility of internet by persons suffering from partial or total blindness, awarded the gold level NFB NBA certificate to Target.com, because Target realized, yes, we have to do this, and they modified their website so that blind people could use it and so that it met accessibility standards, and then became example of good access on computer websites. So it's good that Target was able to change its view of accessibility and ante in for that. So some examples of good accessible websites. There's government sites under the accessibility laws. All government sites, state and government sites, have to be accessible. They have to adhere to the laws about accessibility. If you want sample sites, there's a site called accesssites.org that has examples of accessible websites. But I'll give you a few examples that you could look at or think about. Any CSU site, any California Community College site, and any UC website is an accessible site. It has to be by the laws in California and in the college systems and by state and federal laws. And also, a great example of a good website is the NASA Mars rover site. This site is an award-winning site. It's won several Webbies, and it's got all kinds of things about the Mars rover, and it's got a lot of multimedia and a very high-end site. But what's nice is that it's a good example of a 508 compliant site that does not look ugly, or that doesn't look like they toned down the bells and whistles to make it accessible for blind people. It's a beautiful site. Another great example of an accessible website is at Cal Poly. The e-learning group creates learning modules for certain professors who want to show some kind of visualization to help in their teaching. And this was done in agriculture, probably for apparel merchandising, and it shows textile, different weaves for different things. So you've got plain weave, twill weave, and so forth, and you've got different colors, and you've got a drag bar that'll show the different weave related to different things. And it's an example of something that the visualization is worth 1,000 words. You can demonstrate this to a student very quickly and easily, and everything they build in e-learning is accessible. So I'm not exactly sure how they did it. This is a Flash site, but it's 100% accessible, or it wouldn't be on that website. So why do we care about accessibility? Accessibility is additional work, and doesn't really matter. The reason we care is that it broadens people's access to information, and I think that's a very American viewpoint, that we want people to be able to enjoy everything, enjoy all the freedoms and access to everything that is possible, and I think that's really a very big piece of American culture. Give opportunity to disabled people. Without accessibility, there's lots of opportunities where the doors are shut. Create more communication with other people, and give disabled people better access to jobs. And I really strongly believe that if it's good for a disabled person, it's good for everyone. And so when you're designing accessibility into your website, you're probably making it clear for anyone who is able to use that site also. Different types of disabilities that people have who use the internet include visual disabilities. That could be blindness, low vision, or color blindness. Hearing disabilities. If you're deaf, it makes it hard to hear audio on the internet. Motor disabilities, or movement, loss of motor skills, no motor skills, or maybe arthritis or something that impairs your use of your fingers. Cognitive, reading, and learning disabilities, like dyslexia, autism, or attention deficit disorder. So this is a picture of my son from quite a while ago, and a dog I used to have, Ripley. This is a picture of normal vision. This picture was taken up at Johnson's pasture, and they look fine. So I'm going to give you some examples of some vision impairments that change the way the person sees the world. This is an example of macular degeneration. And you can see there's a dot right in the middle of the field of view. So when you're looking at things out in the world, you'd see a black dot. So you can imagine if you're looking at a computer screen, you would see the peripheral, but you would have trouble seeing what's in the center of the screen, which is exactly where the user needs to click for the most ease of use. So over 10 million Americans suffer from macular degeneration. A lot of times it affects old people. It's a deterioration of the retina, so that you end up with this dark spot in the middle and you can't see. Another vision impairment is glaucoma. My grandmother had glaucoma, and it's hereditary, so I might end up with glaucoma also. But she lived a very long time, and maybe I won't live that long. It happens later in life, and it takes away, it's optical nerve damage, and it takes away your peripheral, so you can only see the center. And again, if you're looking at a computer screen, you're probably going to not see the menu on the left-hand side, or maybe the search box at the top, as well as you would if you had full sight. This is an example of what a person with diabetic retinopathy sees. This happens to people with diabetes, and it's a bleeding of the blood vessels in the eye that causes blotches in front of the eye, and it makes it, difficult to read a web page and maybe cause headaches because you're looking through this haze to try to get information. And then cataracts. Cataracts occur in one eye or both eyes, and it's like a clouding of the lens, but this is the one vision impairment we're talking about that you can actually have surgery for. Hearing disabilities, there's different degrees of deafness. You can hear a little bit or have profound deafness where you can't even hear anything. And there's lots of ways that we have to deal with deafness. Captioning is one of them. I'm sure you've seen captioned videos or captioned television where you can read what the people are saying, and it doesn't require you to have hearing to understand what's being said. Signing also, sign language can help a person understand what's being said. And then some people are very good at reading lips, and maybe you're good. If you've seen a sporting event, you see what the athletes are saying on the court, you might be good at reading lips too. Text can also open a closed world for deaf people. If you think about blogs and wikis and texting, things we take for granted now, for a deaf person to be able to communicate with things like that didn't happen 20 years ago. It's a great way for them to be productive and engaged and have a whole community of people that they can communicate with that they didn't have access to before. YouTube, and YouTube has auto captioning, so if you've used the auto captioning in YouTube, you probably know that it's good, but it's not great. But at least that's a way that a deaf person could have access to that video, even though maybe the captioning isn't perfect. And then you think about music and tools like Pandora, that's an obstacle. Motor disabilities. What if you can't use your hands, or you have a loss of your motor skills and it makes it hard to use a computer? Or you have neuropathy, or nerve damage in your fingers, so you have less mobility in your fingers. There's a lot of emerging tools that are making this much easier for a movement disabled person to use computing. So voice to text, great tool for somebody who doesn't have a disability, great tool for someone who does, because you can just ask Siri to create something for you, or naturally speaking Dragon, you can dictate and have all of your things printed out. Voice control is growing more and more. You probably have seen voice control in a car. You've probably used Siri or whatever your voice control is on your phone. And just recently I got an Amazon Echo that Alexa, and you can have it control all the lights in your house. And my son figured out how if his cell phone is within 20 feet of the dining room, the light will automatically turn on for him. And then, of course, automated cars. The Google car and other cars are automated too, and having a self-driving car. For a disabled person to be able to get your own car and get in it, hopefully, and have it take you where you want to go, that's freedom. If you ever talk to a disabled person about having to get on a bus and wait for the special ride and the amount of waiting and the patience it takes to get somewhere, having an automated car would be golden. There's also cognitive disabilities. Dyslexia is a famous one, and this text at the bottom of this slide is intended to show you what text looks like for a disabled person. It might be very blurry, or the letters look like they're jumping around, and it's very hard to read. There's special browsers created for kids with autism and ADD that help the person focus. And if you think about the design of the Google browser, very minimal, so you're not distracted. But if you are a person with ADD and you think about most places you go to on the internet, with pop-ups about lose weight now, decrease your belly fat, how many celebrities had plastic surgery, who's divorcing who, you can, or the best, cat videos, you can see it would be very, very easy to get distracted and not get what you needed done. All right, so accessible design for buildings, there's curbs, right? The cutout in the curb so that a wheelchair can go up it or somebody with a cane doesn't trip over the curb. For buildings, and ramps so people can access those buildings. And this was all part of the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. For the web, there's a special standard called 508. And when you're at a job interview, say, yes, I'm familiar with 508 compliance. So it's an amendment to the Workforce Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it provides for accessibility standards for all information technology. And this applies to state and federal agencies, though private companies have been sued for this, and they're striving for compliance also. And we already talked about the Target lawsuit. 508 compliance. So Section 508, talking about web accessibility or technology accessibility, lists many, many things. And some of these may look familiar to you and some of them may not, but we'll have a chance for you to read a little bit more about how to technologically implement things so that they're accessible on a web page after the lecture's over. But you'll have a chance to read more about this later in this module. There's also accessibility guidelines set up by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and 14 guidelines with priorities established for each one. 1 is must satisfy, 2 is should satisfy, and 3 means maybe you'll address it, maybe you won't. But there are very specific things that you can do, and I'll leave you to explore that on your own. This is the website, and if we scroll down to the contents, you can see web accessibility guidelines, and there are things like provide equivalent alternatives to auditory and visual content, and design for device independence, and use interim solutions. These are all things that sound like they would be good for any user, not just a disabled user. There are 4 principles I'd like to leave you with before we end the lecture today, though. 1, separate content from style, and I'm sure you heard this a lot in 311. You want your content to be controlled by the HTML and your style to be controlled by the style sheet. So all that content without the CSS is what a screen reader would see and would read through to help a blind person access that web page. 2, semantic markup. Make sure you have well-formed HTML that has a logical breakdown and structure with your headers, a hierarchical structure with your headers and everything in there so that the reader also can navigate using that semantic markup. Consistency. Changing your format and layout of your web page and making it inconsistent makes it hard for a sighted person to use a web page. It makes it hard for a disabled person to use the web page. Doing your design consistently across the site makes it much easier. And then the last thing, number 4, put the important information at the top of the page. If you're somebody using a screen reader and the important information is buried somewhere in the bottom of the page, you're going to have to hear the screen reader go through the entire page until you get to that information. By putting it at the top of the page, you make sure that somebody doesn't have to wait a great deal of time to get to it. And that is true for a blind person, it's true for a sighted person. The information, what that person's going to the page for, that should be at the top. All right, thanks.